A grizzly cub, barely old enough to stand on his own, stares into the vast snow-covered wilderness. His father, once the strongest bear in the valley, lies hidden deep in a cave, his body covered in painful tumors slowly stealing his life. With no one left to help, the cub makes an unthinkable decision to cross dangerous mountains and human territory alone, in search of the only beings who might save his dad, the very humans he was taught to fear. What happens next will leave you speechless, and it just might break your heart. Stay with us for a story of survival, sacrifice, and the bond that defies all instincts. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This helps us bring more inspiring stories like this to you. The late September wind swept through Pine Valley like a whisper carrying sorrow. The trees stood tall and golden, preparing to surrender their leaves to the oncoming winter. In a shaded den tucked beneath a granite overhang, nestled far from any human trail, lay Cody, a seasoned grizzly bear with fur the color of ash and earth. His breaths were shallow, uneven. Tumors, parasitic, bulging masses, had begun to overtake his massive body, distorting the proud silhouette he once carried with effortless command. Beside him, crouched low and trembling, was his only cub, Bo. Just under a year old, Bo was still small for his age, his paws comically oversized, his snout still too soft. His eyes, though, had seen too much. Bo pressed his head gently into his father's side, trying to ignore the heat radiating from the older bear's infected wounds. Cody had once ruled this stretch of wilderness. He had taught Bo how to fish from the icy riverbanks, how to sniff the air for danger, and how to climb the steepest ridges when wolves drew near. But now, those lessons had stopped. For days, Cody hadn't stood up. His groans came in the night, and Bo no longer heard the comforting hum of his father's low growl. That morning, Bo brought him a trout, flopping and confused. Cody didn't move. That's when something inside Bo shifted. It wasn't panic. It was clarity. If he stayed, his father would die. If he left, maybe there was still a chance. He had once seen them, humans, in the far-off meadows, when they came in loud rolling boxes with blinking lights. His father had warned him, "Keep your distance. They bring noise, fire, pain." But Bo also remembered something else. One spring afternoon, hidden in the tall grass, he saw them carry a deer in a net. It had been limping. Hours later, the deer came back running, its leg no longer dragging behind. Maybe, just maybe, humans could help. The decision came without fanfare. Bo stepped back from his father's side and sniffed the cold morning air. Snow was coming. He turned toward the edge of the valley and began walking. Each step was hesitant, his heart pounding, but he didn't look back. The journey ahead was unthinkable for a cub his size, rivers swollen with meltwater, predators circling unseen, and territories watched by older, meaner bears. But none of that mattered to Bo. He had to find them. He had to bring them back. The silence of the valley deepened as the cub disappeared into the trees, Cody unaware of the journey his son had begun. He groaned softly in his sleep, the mountain wind rattling the dying leaves above the cave. Somewhere beyond the next ridge, hope waited, but so did danger. The forest beyond Pine Valley was colder, darker, and far less forgiving. Bo's paws ached with every step over jagged rock and damp leaves. He had only ever traveled short distances with his father, never alone, and certainly not into unfamiliar terrain. Each rustle in the underbrush sent a jolt through his small body. Still, he pressed forward. He didn't know where to go, only that somewhere beyond the thick woods and mountains there were humans. His memory of them was fragmented, a glimpse of orange vests, a scent unlike anything natural, and the echo of voices that didn't belong in the forest. But it was enough. Snow began to fall. Flakes dusted the curve of his back as the wind tugged at his fur. He reached a narrow riverbank and paused. The water was bitter cold and rushed past with the angry hiss of a mountain stream. Bo stared at it, breathing hard. He remembered when his father first taught him how to paddle across shallows, standing beside him like a rock, showing him how to keep his head high and paws wide. But Cody wasn't here now. The current was fast. The river was deep. He stepped back. Then, a sound. A sharp bark. Snapping branches. Bo froze. From the trees came 3 coyotes, lean, hungry, and stalking. They hadn't seen him yet. But they would. Bo's fur bristled. He crouched low and backed up slowly, his eyes fixed on the river. There was no time to weigh options. He leapt. The water swallowed him in an instant, pulling him down in a swirl of freezing white. He thrashed, paws paddling wildly, instincts taking over. The river spat him out 20 feet downstream, throwing him into a clump of wet moss and stone. Coughing, drenched but alive, he had made it. The coyotes paced the far side, frustrated, their howls fading as he slipped out of view behind the trees. Bo didn't stop to rest. Drenched and shivering, he climbed until his legs trembled and the sky above cracked open with gray. Hunger clawed at his belly. He hadn't eaten since morning, and now the cold had sunk deep into his bones. He found a hollow beneath a fallen tree, curled in tight, and trembled through the night. The next morning brought sunlight, but also noise. Distant, but sharp. Bo rose and followed the sound. A low mechanical thrum echoed between the hills. It was the same sound he'd heard that day in the meadow. Humans. Machines. He hurried toward it, ignoring the pain in his legs. By noon, he saw it, a wide dirt road flattened by tires. Strange markings painted the trees. The air smelled of fuel, smoke, and something faintly sweet. Bo waited until the rumble faded before he stepped onto the path. A set of tire tracks led through the snow. He followed them for miles, never stopping. As the sun began to dip behind the pines, he reached a clearing and froze. Ahead, parked beside a weathered ranger cabin, stood a green truck with a white insignia. The front door of the cabin opened, and a man stepped out, wearing a thick coat, a radio strapped to his chest. Bo backed into the woods, heart pounding. He watched as the man knelt near the truck, pulled out a cooler, and tossed something into a metal bin nearby. Then he disappeared inside. Bo waited until the lights inside turned off. Then, slowly, silently, he crept from the trees. The scent drew him, food. He found scraps in the bin, not much, but enough. Bread, meat wrappings, a half-eaten sandwich. He ate quickly, looking over his shoulder the entire time. And then he made a decision. He padded up to the cabin door and sat. That's where Ranger Tom Lazy found him the next morning, covered in mud and snow, shivering, thin, and staring up with wide brown eyes that held something no cub should carry, desperation. Tom froze. A grizzly cub, alone, right at his doorstep. He didn't run. Instead, he crouched low, and in the quiet of that mountain morning, man and bear simply looked at each other. Two creatures who didn't speak the same language, but somehow understood everything. Tom Lazy had worked as a wildlife ranger in Montana's Bitterroot Range for over a decade, and in all those years, he had never seen anything like this. A grizzly cub, alone, uninjured, sitting right at his door as if he had knocked and asked to come in. Tom crouched slowly, careful not to startle the cub. He was lean, malnourished maybe, but what stunned Tom the most was the expression in the cub's eyes. It wasn't confusion or even fear, it was pleading. The moment stretched between them, broken only by a gust of wind scattering pine needles across the porch. Tom didn't dare move closer. He knew enough to recognize the potential danger. Even young, a grizzly was still a wild animal, and where there was a cub, a mother was usually nearby. But this one was different. Bo didn't growl. He didn't back away. He just looked up, tilted his head slightly, then turned. He walked toward the woods, stopped, looked back, then took another few steps. Tom narrowed his eyes. "What in the world?" he muttered under his breath. Bo was leading him. Still cautious, Tom grabbed his field pack, slid on his gloves, and followed, keeping a good distance behind. Every few minutes, the cub would stop, glance back to make sure the human was still there, and continue on. Tom radioed into dispatch, his voice low. "Hey, it's Tom. I'm following a cub, solo. No signs of the mother. Not acting aggressive. We'll update soon." "Copy that, Tom," came the response. "Proceed with extreme caution." They walked for miles. Bo didn't tire. Every step he took was deliberate, as if he had memorized this trail, not just as a path through the forest, but as a lifeline. The terrain grew steeper, more remote. Tom began to recognize the signs: overturned moss, claw marks on bark. This was bear country. But no signs of other bears. Until the scent hit him, sharp, rotting, infection. Tom's stomach turned as he stepped around a boulder and saw the cave. Bo stood just outside it, motionless. Tom approached carefully, his boots crunching lightly over frost. He shone his flashlight into the dark, humid cavern. Then he saw him, a massive grizzly curled into himself like a fallen boulder. But it wasn't the size that made Tom freeze. It was the tumors. Dozens of them, swollen, oozing, distorting the bear's once powerful frame. Cody's sides moved up and down in slow, strained breaths. "Oh God," Tom whispered. He dropped to one knee. Bo walked into the cave, touched his nose gently to his father's face, then looked back at Tom again. The cub hadn't come for food, he had come for help. Tom's mind raced. He'd seen parasitic tumors before, though rarely this advanced. The bear wouldn't last another week, maybe not even days. And under normal policy, injured wildlife was left to nature unless it posed a public threat. But this wasn't normal. This was a dying father and a cub who had crossed miles of wilderness, braved rivers and predators, and walked right up to a human for the chance to save him. Tom reached for his radio again. "Dispatch, I need an emergency team at my location. I've got an adult grizzly with advanced parasitic tumors, and a cub brought me here." Static filled the line, then, "Say again, Tom?" "I said the cub brought me here. Alone. You just have to see it." Bo lay next to his father now, nose pressed against Cody's neck. Tom stayed outside the cave. He didn't want to intrude, but in his heart, something shifted. It wasn't just a wildlife rescue anymore. It was a story, a bond, and somehow, a plea. He sat on a rock and waited with them until the first sound of a helicopter broke the silence. Hours later, the rhythmic thrum of rotor blades echoed through the valley like a distant storm rolling in. The helicopter hovered above the clearing, kicking up flurries of snow and brittle pine needles as the rescue team touched down. 3 figures stepped out, 2 wildlife veterinarians and a tranquilizer specialist. Faces tense, movements deliberate. Tom raised a hand in greeting, his voice nearly lost in the roar. "Be calm, there's a cub. He's not a threat." Dr. Mara Jennings, the lead vet, approached first. Her eyes fell on Bo, still curled beside his father in the cave. She didn't say a word, just paused, absorbing the surreal sight. "You weren't exaggerating," she murmured. "The tumors, they've spread everywhere." Tom nodded. "He hasn't moved in hours." Bo lifted his head at the sound of their voices, alert but not hostile. Mara stopped a few feet from the cave entrance, kneeling slowly to avoid startling him. "That's not fear," she whispered. "He's waiting." The team prepped a tranquilizer dart for Cody. Even in his condition, a startled adult grizzly could lash out with lethal force. The plan was simple in theory: tranquilize, stabilize, then load him into a transport cage for evacuation to the wildlife center in Missoula. But Bo didn't understand plans. When the dart hit Cody's flank, he flinched and groaned in agony. His paw thrashed weakly, and Bo panicked. He stood, growled for the first time, and placed himself between the humans and his father. "Easy, easy," Tom called, holding up both hands. "Back up, give him space." Mara froze. Bo's growl wasn't that of a predator, it was fear, raw and instinctual. His world had already been torn open, and now strangers were sticking things into the only creature he still loved. Tom took a slow step forward. "Bo," he said, voice low, unsure why he used the name but feeling like it mattered. "No one's hurting him. I promise, we're trying to save him." Bo didn't move. Then something unexpected happened. Cody, in a drugged haze, let out a low moan. Bo turned to him. The sound triggered a memory, his father's voice during storms, during hunger, during nights when the cold crept in. He took one last look at the humans and stepped aside. The team sprang into action. They examined Cody carefully, the mood shifting from tense to grim. The tumors weren't just external. Internal swelling was evident. Infection had set in. The bear was dying fast. "There's a chance we can slow the infection," Mara said, voice tight, "but we're looking at major surgery. It's never been done at this scale on a wild grizzly." Tom looked at Bo. "Then we try. We owe it to him, and to that little guy." They loaded Cody gently into a reinforced cage and secured it to the chopper. But Bo wouldn't get in. He paced near the clearing, eyes wide, sniffing the air nervously. The roar of the rotors terrified him. This wasn't natural. It sounded like danger. "He won't come," one of the vets said. "We can't force him." Tom crouched. "Bo. I know it's loud. I know it's scary. But he's going. And if you want to see him again, you need to trust us." The cub looked between his father and the woods. Then he did something that none of them would forget. He walked up to the helicopter door and stepped in. The surgical room had long gone quiet. Cody lay still beneath a set of warming blankets, connected to machines that monitored his pulse and breathing. His massive chest rose and fell in slow, uneven rhythm. Bo refused to sleep. He hadn't eaten either. His enclosure was lined with soft straw, and the staff left fish, berries, even honey, but he wouldn't touch any of it. He stayed by the wall closest to the surgical bay, his nose brushing the cold metal grate, ears perked for every sound. Tom came often, sometimes just to sit with him. "He's fighting, little guy," he said softly. "He's got that same fire in him you do." Bo didn't move. But something about Tom's voice seemed to settle the cub's trembling paw, if only a little. By day 3, Cody was awake, but weak. The infection was slowing, and the largest tumors had been removed. Still, the doctors were cautious. Then the test results came back. Dr. Marla walked into the observation room, her face tight. She held the pathology report in her hand, but her body language said more than the paper ever could. "It's cancer," she said. Tom stared at her. "What kind?" "Neurofibromatosis-like growths. Likely genetic. It's not from an external parasite, it's internal, progressive, untreatable long-term. We removed what we could, but he's not going to recover fully. Maybe a few more months. A year, if we're lucky." Tom leaned back in the chair and rubbed his hands over his face. "And the cub?" Marla hesitated. "We don't know yet. There's a chance it's hereditary. If Bo carries it, he could develop the same condition." The silence in the room felt heavier than the walls. They had fought so hard, crossed impossible barriers, and now this. "We need to prepare for options," Marla added. "Cody won't survive in the wild. And if Bo's at risk, we'll need to consider long-term captivity." Tom looked through the glass at the little cub, who was finally lying down, curled into himself like he was trying to disappear. He wasn't just fighting for his father anymore. He was fighting for his future. Later that afternoon, Tom stepped into Bo's enclosure, just for a moment. He didn't make sudden moves. He didn't bring food. He just sat down. Bo lifted his head, eyes tired, as if he knew something had shifted. "You brought me to him," Tom said quietly. "Now I'm going to bring you through this. I swear it." Bo crawled toward him slowly, until he rested beside the man's boot. He didn't touch him. But he didn't move away, either. It was the closest either of them had come to breaking the wall between species. But not everyone was on their side. A report had been filed with the state's wildlife authority. A high-ranking official visited the center 2 days later, demanding to know why a grizzly cub was being handled like a domestic animal, and why taxpayer dollars were being spent on a bear with no chance of release. Tom confronted him in the hallway. "He came to us," he said. "He sought us out. That cub led me to his dying father. If that doesn't warrant a second chance, I don't know what does." "It's a wild animal," the man shot back. "We have policies for a reason." "Well, maybe your policies never looked into the eyes of a cub who's already lost everything." The man left, but the message was clear. Their time and resources were running out. Tom called a meeting with Marla and the center's director that night. "I want to foster the cub," he said. "Not just until he recovers. Long term. I'll follow protocol. I'll handle the health screenings. I'll do everything by the book. But he needs someone." Marla looked stunned. "You've raised orphan deer. Birds. Even wolves. But a grizzly, Tom? Not just any bear? You know that." There was a long silence. Then a nod. "We'll start the process." That night, Tom stayed in Bo's enclosure. The cub lay near his boots again, his breath slow and steady, and for the first time in days, he closed his eyes. Meanwhile, in the room down the hall, Cody blinked in the dim light, staring through the glass. His son was safe, for now. The snow fell harder in Missoula that week, muffling the outside world under a heavy white silence. Inside the Wildlife Center, the sterile light cast long shadows across the tile floors, and every footstep echoed with quiet urgency. Cody wasn't getting better. The initial success of the surgery had faded. The tumors had returned aggressively. What the vets had feared was now undeniable. The disease was moving faster than they could stop it. His breathing had become ragged again. His movements more labored. And the infection had flared, despite everything they'd tried. Bo could sense it. The cub refused to eat again. His body had grown thinner. His eyes no longer held that flicker of wild curiosity. Just wait. He lay curled in the same spot, barely moving, as if his tiny body was trying to mourn something not yet gone. Tom watched them both. Every day. Every hour. He brought Bo blankets. Sat beside him. Read quietly to fill the silence. Books on nature. On bears. On courage. Not because Bo understood the words, but because Tom needed to say them out loud to someone. But one night, Cody collapsed. His hind legs gave out, and he cried out, loud and broken. The kind of sound you don't forget. The kind of sound that splits a room in half. The staff rushed in. They tried to stabilize him. But his blood pressure plummeted. He went still. His eyes locked onto Bo through the glass, as if trying to memorize the shape of his son one last time. Tom stood beside Dr. Marla in the control room. If we don't euthanize, she said softly, he's going to suffer. Badly? Tom shook his head. Tears burned behind his eyes. I need to give Bo something. Something more than pain. He crossed mountains for this. Mara nodded, her jaw tight. We'll give him a few more hours. But Tom. I know. At midnight, Tom made his decision. He entered Bo's enclosure slowly and knelt beside the cub. It's time, he whispered. But you deserve to say goodbye. He opened the side door to Cody's recovery room, a risk no protocol would ever approve. Bo walked through, and for the first time since that terrible morning in Pine Valley, he curled into his father's fur. Cody's eyes fluttered. He was still alive, but fading. Tom stayed nearby, not as a ranger, not as a guardian, but as a witness. Bo didn't cry, not the way humans do. But his body shook with something ancient, something raw. A sound, low in his chest, deep and mournful, filled the room. Minutes passed, then hours. And as dawn lit the snow-covered windows, Cody stopped breathing. There were no alarms. No machines screaming. Just silence. Tom stepped forward and lowered his head. Rest now, old man. He's safe. You did everything you could. Bo didn't move for a long time. Eventually, he walked out of the room and curled beside Tom's boot once again. Tom sat on the floor and wept. Later that week, the official paperwork arrived. Tom was granted provisional approval to foster Bo through the winter under strict observation. The wildlife authorities had been moved partly by the story, but mostly by the footage. A hidden camera in the enclosure had captured everything, Bo guiding Tom to the cave, protecting his father, staying by his side in his final hours. The video leaked online, and the world watched. A cub who crossed mountains for his dying father. A ranger who listened when no one else would. And a bond that blurred every line between species, protocol, and policy. Spring came slow to Montana that year. The snow melted hesitantly, pooling into crystal veins that ran through the trees like memories thawing from a long sleep. Buds returned to the branches. The sky, once steel gray, softened into a wide canvas of pale blue. And in a quiet clearing outside of Missoula, Bo ran, not in fear, not in search of help. He ran for the joy of movement. For the first time in months, the cub's legs felt strong beneath him. He darted between pine trunks, climbed small ridges, and rolled down muddy hills. His coat had thickened again. His ribs no longer showed. He was still young, but growing. And Tom was always nearby. The ranger had converted a small patch of land on the edge of state territory into a protected foster range. It wasn't a zoo. And it wasn't the wild. But it was space. Real earth. Real trees. Real sky. Enough to be a beginning. Tom followed all the guidelines: veterinary checkups, controlled socialization, behavioral evaluations. The center sent biologists every 2 weeks to monitor Bo's development. But every evening, after the paperwork was done, after the gates were locked, it was just them. Tom would sit on the porch of the tiny cabin at the edge of the field, sip from a tin mug, and watch Bo explore. Sometimes the cub would approach and sit beside him, the way he had done in the enclosure. Other times, Bo stayed at the tree line, watching the wind ripple through the branches like something sacred. They had learned to coexist in the silence. But grief doesn't vanish. It evolves. Sometimes Bo would stop mid-play and stare off into the distance, ears tilted, as if listening for Cody's heavy footsteps. Other times, he'd sniff the air sharply and grow still, remembering scents now long faded. Tom saw it too, in himself. He had never married. No children. His life had been trail maps and field reports. But now, there was something in him that had cracked open. Not broken, just revealed. The kind of space loss creates when it clears the ground for something unexpected. One morning, a new letter arrived. It was from the State Wildlife Commission. Subject: long-term placement decision for Grizzly cub, Bo. Tom unfolded it slowly, heart pounding. The result: Bo will remain in long-term supervised care under your guardianship, with re-evaluation annually. No relocation at this time. He exhaled, chest tight. They were letting him stay. He stepped outside with the letter still in hand. Bo was by the stream, pawing at a fish-shaped rock. Tom whistled softly. Bo turned, and for a brief second, Tom swore the cub smiled. Not with his mouth, but with his whole body. Like some tension he'd carried since that cold day in Pine Valley had finally let go. Tom knelt in the grass, arms on his knees. "You're not just a cub anymore, are you?" he said quietly. "You're a survivor." Bo walked over, bumped Tom's boot with his nose, and lay down beside him. In the years that followed, Bo became more than a local legend. His story inspired fundraisers, wildlife education programs, and even new legislation around bear rescue and rehabilitation. But for Tom, none of that mattered as much as the quiet moments. Like the day Bo let him rest a hand, just briefly, on his shoulder. Or the morning Bo climbed the ridge above the cabin and howled into the open air, not in sorrow, but in declaration. The wilderness had taken so much from him. But it had given something back too. A second chance. A family, not by blood, but by something stronger. Choice. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Share it with someone who loves inspiring stories, and help us spread messages of courage and hope.